Jung uncovered something that reveals why empaths experience the deepest betrayals from those who profess to love them, and it's not what you'd expect. Through his clinical research, Jung found empaths who consistently attracted what he termed false lovers, individuals who were captivated by their emotional abilities but secretly harbored resentment toward them for possessing what they themselves had lost. These connections followed a clear sequence: initial captivation, progressive erosion, and final bitterness masked as affection. Jung discovered that empaths don't merely inspire admiration, they awaken envy in those who have suppressed their own emotional truth. This generates a poisonous cycle where those nearest to you feign love for what they truly wish to eliminate. Today, I'll reveal Jung's findings about why empaths awaken envy in people who feign love for them, and the mental process that transforms your empathy into a target for those who have forsaken their own emotional depths. The sequence became evident through Jung's research, with a patient he named the emotional mirror, a woman whose empathy exposed others' emotional emptiness so clearly that it triggered unconscious hostility in those who professed to worship her. You already understand something most people won't admit. Your empathy wasn't voluntary, it was crafted through survival. What I term the empathic wound usually begins in childhood, where affection became conditional and security relied on interpreting every subtle expression, every mood change, every hidden feeling in your surroundings. Jung witnessed this sequence consistently in his practice. The empath develops what he termed psychic permeability, the failure to separate where their emotions stop and others start. But here's what you've likely intuited. This wasn't fragility, it was evolution. You learned to survive by becoming an emotional detection system. Jung recorded the case of Alina, a 28-year-old artist whose empathic abilities had drawn 3 successive relationships that followed the same patterns. Each partner initially idolized her sensitivity, labeled it beautiful and rare. But within months, that same sensitivity became excessive, overwhelming, dramatic. You've experienced this, haven't you? The person who was attracted to your depth suddenly begins eroding it. They start with gentle remarks. You're overthinking again. Not everything is that deep. You're being too sensitive. What they're actually expressing is that your emotional genuineness reminds them of what they've discarded in themselves. Jung termed this the mirror effect. Your empathy presents a reflection of their emotional emptiness, and instead of confronting it, they assault the mirror. As Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but most people choose irritation over understanding. Alina's first partner, Marcus, demonstrated this sequence. He was initially captivated by her capacity to detect his moods before he was even conscious of them, but that captivation rapidly transformed into bitterness. "It's like living with a psychic," he complained to friends. "She always knows what I'm feeling before I do, and it makes me feel exposed." This is what you've encountered, your gift making others feel exposed. But here's what Jung comprehended. Their unease isn't about you being excessive, it's about them being insufficient. They've severed from their emotional reality so completely that your genuineness feels like a judgment. What I term the sensitivity shamming begins when they realize your empathy endangers their emotional numbness. They can't acknowledge they've forsaken their own depths, so they persuade you that depth itself is the issue. You've likely heard these phrases: "You're too emotional," "You overthink everything," "You're being dramatic." Each statement is a projection of their own terror of feeling. Jung noted that projection ranks among the most frequent psychological occurrences, and empaths serve as the ideal canvas for others' rejected emotions. If you've been informed you're overly sensitive and you're prepared to reclaim that as your power, comment below. My sensitivity is my superpower. You've intuited this reality, even if you couldn't articulate it. The individuals who profess to love you frequently conceal a hidden bitterness toward your emotional abilities. What I term empathic envy functions differently than basic jealousy. Jealousy seeks to own, envy seeks to eliminate. Jung comprehended that envy arises from what he labeled the shadow, the portion of the psyche holding everything we've disowned about ourselves. When someone has suppressed their emotional sensitivity to survive in a disconnected world, meeting an empath activates intense shadow responses. You already identify this sequence. The individual begins by glorifying your empathy. You understand me like no one else. You see right through me. You have such a gift. But that glorification is actually the initial phase of envy. They're not honoring your gift. They're bitter that you possess what they've lost. Alina's second relationship illustrated this flawlessly. David was a prosperous attorney who had methodically deadened his emotions to ascend the corporate hierarchy. When he encountered Alina, her emotional profundity captivated him. She could read people instantly, he told Jung. It was like having a superpower by association. But captivation transformed into bitterness when Alina's gift started exposing uncomfortable realities about David's own emotional void. She would detect his sorrow after challenging cases, his terror of vulnerability, his rage at feeling imprisoned in his profession. Instead of confronting these realities, David started assaulting the messenger. Jung recorded how David initiated what I term light-dimming behaviors. He would disrupt Alina when she shared emotional insights. He'd chuckle dismissively when she expressed profound feelings. He began labeling her the feelings police and implying she was draining to be around. You've encountered this methodical dimming, haven't you? The individual who once honored your depth now regards it like a weight. They create humor about your sensitivity in front of others. They roll their eyes when you share insights. They imply you're interpreting too much into things. Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." But instead of confronting that challenge, the envious individual attempts to eliminate the mirror. They can't eliminate their own shadow, so they attempt to eliminate yours. What you've sensed is accurate. Their assaults on your sensitivity are admissions of their own emotional bankruptcy. When they label you excessive, they're confessing they're insufficient. When they claim you're overthinking, they're exposing they've ceased thinking entirely about anything that matters. Jung observed that envy is the antagonist of the fortunate, and your emotional authenticity represents the ultimate fortune to those who have sold their souls for social acceptance or material success. But here's what you may not have realized. Their envy serves a psychological function. By attacking your gifts, they temporarily relieve the pain of their own emotional poverty. Each time they diminish you, they feel momentarily better about their own numbness. This is why the attacks never stop. They need to keep diminishing you to avoid facing themselves. Jung called this psychological vampirism. They feed on your emotional energy while simultaneously resenting you for having it. You've probably wondered how someone can claim to love you while systematically undermining your core essence. What I call false love isn't conscious deception. It's unconscious self-protection wrapped in the language of affection. Jung identified what he termed persona relationships, connections based not on genuine intimacy, but on what each person can provide to maintain the other's false self. The false lover doesn't love you. They love what you do for them. They love how your empathy makes them feel understood without having to do the emotional work themselves. You already know this feeling. The relationship where you give emotional labor constantly but receive only surface-level affection in return. Where your deep insights are met with shallow responses. Where your vulnerability is treated as entertainment rather than sacred truth. Alina's third relationship revealed the most sophisticated form of false love. Robert was emotionally intelligent enough to recognize the value of empathy, but too damaged to develop it himself. So, he created what Jung called a parasitic dynamic. He positioned himself as Alina's emotional project. "He made me feel needed," Alina told Jung. He would share his childhood trauma, his fears, his dreams. "I thought we were building deep intimacy," but Jung recognized the pattern. Robert was using Alina's empathy to process his emotions without ever developing his own emotional capacity. This is the cruelest form of false love, the person who treats your empathy like a service they're entitled to. They download their emotional pain onto you, expect you to process it, and then resent you for being capable of what they cannot do. You've experienced this emotional one-sidedness. The person who comes to you with every crisis but disappears when you need support, who expects you to understand their complexity but shows no interest in understanding yours, who takes your emotional labor for granted while offering nothing substantial in return. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But in false love, only one person transforms. The empath becomes depleted while the false lover remains unchanged." What I call love bombing followed by love dimming is the clearest sign of false love. They initially overwhelm you with attention and admiration for your sensitivity. They make you feel like your empathy is the most beautiful thing they've ever encountered. But this isn't genuine appreciation, it's acquisition. They're not celebrating your gift, they're claiming it. And once they feel they have access to your empathy, they begin the process of controlling and diminishing it because deep down they know they don't deserve what they can't reciprocate. Jung observed that where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. False lovers are driven by the will to power, the need to control your empathy to serve their emotional needs while preventing it from exposing their emotional poverty. You've sensed this power dynamic, the way they make you feel guilty for having needs, the way they position themselves as the rational one and you as the emotional one, the way they frame your depth as instability and their shallowness as stability. If you've experienced someone claiming to love your empathy while slowly trying to dim it, comment, "I see through false love." Now, you've experienced something that Jung called psychological poisoning, the process by which false lovers convince you that your greatest strength is actually your greatest weakness. What I call gift gaslighting is their primary weapon against your empathic authenticity. Jung understood that projection is the mechanism by which people avoid confronting their own shadow. Instead of facing their emotional numbness, they project that numbness onto you and call it rationality. Instead of owning their fear of depth, they project that fear onto you and call your depth instability. You already know how this feels. The gradual erosion of confidence in your own perceptions, the creeping doubt about whether you're really too sensitive, the way their constant criticism makes you question the very gift that has guided you throughout your life. Alina's relationship with Robert demonstrated this poisoning process perfectly. He began subtly questioning her insights. "Are you sure you're reading that correctly? Maybe you're projecting your own feelings. I think you're overanalyzing." Each question was designed to plant doubt about her empathic accuracy. And because empaths are naturally self-reflective, Alina began second-guessing herself. "Maybe I am too sensitive," she told Jung. "Maybe I do read too much into things." This is the cruelest aspect of empathic abuse. They use your own thoughtfulness against you. Your willingness to consider other perspectives becomes the weapon they use to make you doubt your own. Jung observed that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And false lovers exploit your journey towards self-acceptance by making you believe that accepting your empathy is accepting a flaw rather than embracing a gift. What I call reality revision is their systematic attempt to rewrite your empathic experiences. When you sense their anger, they insist they're not angry. When you feel their withdrawal, they claim nothing has changed. When you detect their resentment, they accuse you of being paranoid. You've lived this maddening experience. Your empathy tells you one thing, but they insist on another reality. Over time, this creates what Jung called psychic dissociation, a split between what you feel and what you're told is real. The false lover's goal isn't to help you become more accurate in your empathic perceptions. It's to make you abandon those perceptions entirely. They want you to rely on their version of reality instead of trusting your own emotional intelligence. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But false lovers convince you that who you truly are is a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be celebrated. You've probably noticed how their projection escalates over time. First, they question your specific insights. Then, they question your empathic ability in general. Finally, they question your overall emotional stability. This progression is designed to make you completely dependent on their interpretation of reality. But here's what you've always known. Even when doubt crept in, your empathy has been right more often than it's been wrong. The uncomfortable truths you've sensed have usually proven accurate over time. Your emotional radar has protected you from countless situations your logical mind would have missed. Jung understood that your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. The false lover tries to convince you that looking inside is dangerous, that trusting your inner vision is foolish, that awakening is actually sleeping. Their projection is confession. When they call you unstable, they're revealing their own instability. When they call you too emotional, they're admitting their own emotional poverty. When they call you unrealistic, they're confessing their own disconnection from authentic reality. You've reached a crucial recognition. The problem was never your empathy. The problem was accepting false lovers who couldn't honor your gift. What I call the empathic awakening begins when you stop trying to make yourself smaller to fit into relationships that were never meant for you. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires withdrawing projections and reclaiming disowned parts of yourself. For empaths, this means reclaiming your sensitivity as a strength rather than accepting others' definition of it as weakness. You already possess the wisdom to distinguish between healthy relationships and empathic abuse. The difference is simple. Healthy partners celebrate your empathy while toxic partners try to control it. Healthy partners want to understand your gift while false lovers want to exploit it. Jung's work with Alina revealed the transformation process. After 3 relationships with false lovers, Alina began recognizing the pattern. "I realized I was attracted to emotionally unavailable people because they felt familiar," she told Jung. "My childhood taught me that love meant working harder to earn approval." This is your breakthrough moment. Understanding that your empathic wound created an attraction to people who would recreate that wound. You were unconsciously drawn to false lovers because they felt like home, even though home was where you learned to survive by abandoning yourself. Empathic boundaries differ from regular boundaries. They're not walls that keep everyone out. They're filters that determine who gets access to your emotional gifts. As Jung noted, boundaries are not about keeping others out, but about knowing where you end and others begin. You've learned this through painful experience. Not everyone deserves access to your empathic abilities. Some people will use your gift to avoid doing their own emotional work. Others will resent you for having what they've abandoned. Still, others will try to dim your light to feel better about their own darkness. The awakened empath develops what Jung called conscious discrimination, the ability to sense who can honor your gift and who will exploit it. This isn't about becoming closed-hearted, it's about becoming wise-hearted. You already know how to identify genuine appreciation versus false love. Genuine appreciation seeks to understand your empathy and learn from it. False love seeks to use your empathy and control it. Genuine appreciation grows deeper over time. False love becomes more demanding over time. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the awakened empath understands that not every irritation requires self-examination. Sometimes the irritation is simply about encountering someone who cannot appreciate your gift. What I call gift protection becomes your new priority. Just as you wouldn't give a precious instrument to someone who would damage it, you don't share your empathic gifts with people who will abuse them. This isn't selfishness, it's stewardship. You've probably noticed that as you've become more protective of your empathy, certain people have labeled you as cold or different. This is actually confirmation that you're healing. The people who benefited from your unprotected empathy will always resent your awakening. Jung observed that the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. Your journey through empathic abuse, if integrated consciously, creates an unshakable trust in your own perceptions. If you've reached the point where you protect your empathic gifts and no longer doubt their value, comment, "I guard my light fiercely now." You've arrived at what Jung considered the highest form of psychological development, what I call sovereign empathy. This is empathy that serves from strength rather than wound, that gives from abundance rather than depletion, that connects from wholeness rather than need. The sovereign empath has integrated both their empathic gifts and their capacity for discernment. You can feel deeply without losing yourself. You can love authentically without accepting abuse. You can offer compassion without becoming a doormat. As Jung wrote, the acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. And for empaths, this means embracing both your sensitivity and your strength. You are not fragile because you feel deeply. You are powerful because you feel authentically. You've learned to distinguish between empathy and codependency. Empathy connects you to others while maintaining your own center. Codependency dissolves your center in service to others' dysfunction. Empathy enhances relationships. Codependency enables dysfunction. The sovereign empath attracts different relationships, partnerships with people who have done their own emotional work, who appreciate depth because they've cultivated their own, who celebrate your empathy because they understand its value. Jung wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." The sovereign empath recognizes genuine love by its lack of power dynamics. Real love doesn't try to control, diminish, or exploit your empathy. You now understand that your empathic experiences with false lovers were initiations, not failures. Each toxic relationship taught you something essential about recognizing authentic love versus pretense. Each experience of envy revealed the contrast between your emotional authenticity and others' emotional poverty. What I call empathic mastery means using your sensitivity as a guidance system for life decisions. Your empathy tells you which opportunities serve your growth and which drain your energy. Your empathy reveals which people honor your truth and which seek to exploit it. You've become the hero of your own story, no longer the victim of others' envy, but the sovereign of your own empathic kingdom. You decide who gets access to your gifts. You choose relationships that celebrate rather than tolerate your sensitivity. Jung observed that your task is not to seek love, but to find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. For empaths, the primary barrier is accepting others' definition of love instead of trusting your own empathic knowing of what love truly feels like. Your journey from empathic wound to sovereign power is complete. Jung's discovery revealed that your empathic experiences aren't personal failures, but archetypal patterns. You're not the first empath to attract false lovers, and you won't be the last. But you can break the cycle by refusing to accept love that comes with conditions. Your empathy was never the problem. The problem was living in a world that has forgotten how to feel authentically and encountering people who resent you for remembering. Your sensitivity is not something to heal from, it's something to heal with. You've learned to recognize envy disguised as love, projection masked as concern, and exploitation hidden behind affection. You've reclaimed your empathic gifts as sacred rather than shameful. You've become the guardian of your own emotional truth. Jung believed that individuated people become lights in the darkness for others still struggling to find their way. Your journey from wounded empath to sovereign empath serves not just your own healing, but becomes a beacon for other sensitive souls who need to see that transformation is possible. The most essential wisdom I can offer is this: trust your empathic intelligence completely. When something feels off, investigate. When someone's behavior doesn't match their words, believe the behavior. When your empathy tells you someone is safe or unsafe, listen without question. Remember that your empathy is a gift to be treasured, not a burden to be managed. The right people will recognize this treasure and treat it with the reverence it deserves. Those who don't were never meant to be in your inner circle. Your journey continues as a sovereign empath who knows the difference between love that celebrates and love that diminishes. You attract people who honor your gifts because you've learned to honor them yourself. As you move forward, remember Alina's final insight to Jung. I learned that my empathy wasn't my weakness disguised as strength. It was my strength that others tried to disguise as weakness. That's your truth too. If this resonated with your empathic journey, check out my other video on Carl Jung, How to Never Get Angry or Bothered by Anyone, where we explore Jung's techniques for maintaining emotional sovereignty in a world that often misunderstands sensitivity. If you've recognized yourself in this empathic transformation and you're ready to live as a sovereign empath, comment, "I choose authentic love over false comfort." Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.